My name is Lorcan Sheehan. I am the CEO of a company called Performance Supply Chain Limited. Delighted to be with you here today, and actually also delighted to be joined by sort of three young supply chain professionals. Um, I've got Molly Lynch from Musgraves. I've got Niall Durkin, who's with currently with Kerry Group, and Stephen McGinley, who's with Irish Distillers, which is part of the Pernod Ricard group. I see we've got plenty of people still joining us, so we'll give them a minute or two. But maybe while we're waiting to get started, I'll just give you a little bit of background, I suppose, to why we're doing this. So this is one of the events that we have in Ireland's first ever Logistics and Supply Chain Skills Week. Um, and that week is, I suppose, is designed really to raise awareness for the types of careers that are available within supply chain, um, and uh, and to sort of show, I suppose, in many respects, demystify supply chain. So supply chains had a higher profile, I suppose, for some of the right reasons and some of the wrong reasons. But I think during pandemic and various other pieces, I think we all realized what essential workers were, and we realized that it's a lot of our folks in healthcare and also the people in the physical supply chains that sort of kept food on the shelves and kept people fed, as well as part of that. And I think a much greater awareness of that. Supply chains also been on the news as well with Brexit and with the pandemic, with war in Ukraine and various other pieces. And suddenly we realize the connected world that we're living in. Uh, so within the Supply Chain Skills Week, we have a sort of a physical, actually a list of I think about 30 events in total. Um, and this is a part of a series of, both online webinars within that week, really to sort of address different, I suppose, career paths and career opportunities within supply chain. And today, I think we're very lucky to talk about the whole idea of sort of graduate programs for people to enter into a supply chain career. And I say, very lucky. I'm going to ask each of the folks to introduce themselves in a second, but the three have, I suppose, at different stages of their graduate programs. A lot of the graduate supply chain programs are a sort of a 2 year post after your graduation. Stephen is in sort of rotation number two in year number one of that with Irish Distillers. Niall is in year two of that with Kerry Group, and Molly has graduated and gone on to onto a sort of full-time supply chain career, having come through the Musgraves program. Um, but maybe I suppose if I start, Molly, with yourself, if that was okay, and just give us a little bit of a who you are, and I suppose how you've got to where you are might be a good place to start if you're okay with that.
Thanks, Jade. Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Lynch. I am a supply chain operations manager in Musgrave Retail Partners Ireland. So some of you may recognise it as the Centre and Super Value supply chain. I've been in this role for the last year. So as Lorcan mentioned, I completed a 2-year structured graduate programme with Musgrave and finished it 2 years ago. So as I said, it was a 2-year programme, and within that I completed 3 structured rotations across our supply chain. So this ranged from rotation 1, which was an operations one, so within the warehousing and logistics side of things, so hands-on, seeing suppliers as they come in to service all the central and super values that we service in the Republic of Ireland. It was seeing kind of end-to-end as it comes in from suppliers. I then moved into a second rotation, again within the supply chain function, but it was primarily on supply chain efficiency. So again, end-to-end, working with suppliers that like Stephen and Niall, seeing what we can do to take cost out of our supply chain, right through back to the warehousing and then out to store, so dealing with retailers. So this was really insightful, changing every day. And then my final rotation was within central supply chain, or some of you may have heard of the role as demand planning. So this was working with a portfolio of suppliers, which was on the ambient side of things. So dealing with massive suppliers, again, like Niall and Stephen's companies, looking at stock holding, lead times, and I suppose, and that's where supply chain and how the day-to-day events, such as Niall mentioned, like a war or a weather, an extreme weather pattern, how this can impact food business within supply chain, or COVID, is exactly as Lorcan said, everyone still had to eat throughout the pandemic. So really, really good experience across 2 years. And as I said, I moved then into a management role within the chill supply chain. So now my primary focus is dealing with all suppliers, I suppose, that you put in your fridge from Centra and Super Value. In terms of my background in education, I completed a 4-year degree in Musgrave in Dublin City University. I studied a Bachelor of Business Studies.
Gotcha. Perfect indeed. No, that's great. Great introduction indeed. Niall, do you want to kick us off a little bit of background on your good self?
Yeah, well, my name's Niall Durkin. I'm obviously a second year graduate, as Lorcan said, from Kerry Group. I'm from Trim in County Meath. And I suppose I come from an agricultural background, so I always kind of had an interest in the food industry. So I went on then from that and I studied a Bachelor in Food Science from University College Dublin. I think even to this day, it's still very useful in
Yeah.
supply chain to have that scientific background and to understand that side of things in production. But from there, I suppose I always saw myself as a bit more of a strategic thinker, and I wanted to get involved more in business. So I did a master's in food business strategy from Michael Smurfit Business School. And I suppose one module that really stood out to me then was supply chain management. So I started applying for programs. And I guess then Kerry, I suppose, stood out to me just with the whole European supply chain program that I was going to get an opportunity to travel around Europe. And it's a global company, which brings some complexities for supply chain, obviously as well. So from there, I started with Kerry, and first year I was living in Edinburgh, so definitely a baptism of fire moving out of Ireland and moving to a new country that I'd never, well, I'd been to just to travel, but I'd never lived in before. And it was a yeast manufacturing site, a long lead time kind of production. So that gave me some skills, make the stock as well. So it made me develop some skills for that type of business.
Yeah.
And then usually with Kerry, the second year, then you would move on to another site. So right now I'm based just north of Antibes. I live in Antibes, just to the side of Nice and Cannes in the south of France. So I don't think I'm ever going to live in a nicer place than I live in right now.
Life
Uh,
is tough for you right now, Niall. Yeah, that's
yeah,
fine.
it is
Yeah.
tough. Yeah, I'm looking out the window there and it's raining. But
Okay.
look, it's again, it's almost like joining a new company. You've different difficulties. Lead time is shorter. You have different supply chain complexities and different raw materials that you're working with. So it was a really, really good experience. And even to add to that, did a bit of time in our site in Liverpool, which just kind of shows the opportunities within the site in the company where if they need you, you might get drawn in to do something for a while. So I'm 18 months into the program and I've worked across 3 countries, none of them being Ireland. So it has been a very good experience so far.
No, that's fantastic experience. Yes, Stephen, do you want to kick us off then on your background?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Dublin, but I grew up kind of all around Europe as a child. Lived in Hungary, Czech Republic, and Germany. My dad was an engineer, so he was kind of working in the operations and supply chain side of businesses. So it was kind of always in the background at home. And then I did my undergrad in Maynooth in business management, which was great because we got to do a year's placement there. And I did it in the ESB in their HR department because I originally wanted to get into HR when I finished college, but during the year placement, COVID kicked in, and supply chain was all in the news and everything. And I went back into college and had a really good lecture for supply chain. And through that, I applied to the masters in UCD Smurfit, like Niall, but mine was in supply chain management, which was great. And then in the masters, we had a talk from Alexi, who's the transformation manager at Irish Distillers, and he kind of took us through the whole supply chain at Irish Distillers, and I kind of thought it was a really interesting company to work for. And yeah, so I'm 7 months into the graduate program here now. It's the first year of it, so we're kind of carving our own path, but it's really well planned out. We've got 6 rotations altogether,
Very
and
good.
it's one in demand planning at the start, and then I'm in domestic operations at the moment, so that'll last until June, and then I'm in supply planning after that. And for those of you who don't know about Irish Distillers, because I actually didn't know what Irish Distillers was before we got our talk, they make the likes of Jameson, Redbreast, Powers, Middleton, loads of other whiskies and spirits, and they're owned by the Pernod Ricard Group, which kind of makes Absolute Vodka and Kahlua and Campo Viejo wines. There's loads of different companies in Pernod Ricard, but yeah.
Fantastic. Well, listen, three great companies from all of you, and I suppose interesting to see the slightly different backgrounds as well, actually, from where you're coming from. And actually, we had an event earlier in the week for the supply chain week where it seemed to be that it was full of sort of reformed accountants and engineers and scientists as well. So I'm glad to see that the next generation has got a few scientists and engineers and business degrees as well that go into that. But it also shows, I suppose, the variety of the types of roles that are there. Um, and I suppose some of you have touched on it, but I suppose when did you sort of first think of sort of supply chain, or what sort of was that trigger point for you on as sort of a supply chain as a direction? Because I've yet to meet the 7-year-old who said they want to be a supply chain professional at a later stage. Anyone want to take that? I think, Niall, you mentioned you did a particular lecture in, was it third
Yeah,
year?
yeah, it was a kind of a lecture when I do my masters. I also did one in food science that kind of touched on supply chain. But I think it was really just wanting to get a really good grasp of how a business runs, and supply chain runs from your suppliers right to your customer and everything in between. And it's very functional that way. If there's new products being brought in, well, we need to know what the lead time is on the raw materials so that we can communicate to our customers and so on. And if there's quality issues, everything becomes part of supply chain. So I think uh, for a starting place in a career, it's really a perfect place to really understand how a business works from A to B, really.
Yeah, no, you really are at the heart of the operations. And I suppose I look to you, Molly. How many shops on a daily basis are you trying to feed product in, and roughly how many products are we in the thousands or the tens of thousands of products, or what are we looking at?
Definitely say the tens of thousands of products. So we in Republic of Ireland, we're servicing over 600 stores daily across Chill and Ambient. So definitely a huge network and a huge fleet. And to Niall's point there in supply chain, you really are the center of it. Like it's so cross functional in terms of even internally, you're dealing with sales, finance, promotion. You're working then with seasonal calendars, retailers, suppliers, and working with supply chain, say within suppliers as well. So in terms of where my, I suppose, drive to go into supply chain, it came from that even unpredictability, wanting to kind of not go into the same thing every day, because that's, I suppose, what you're signing up to whenever you go into a supply chain career. So it's exciting, and you can see end to end. You can, I suppose, see value for the work that you're putting into it as well, even albeit it can be complex. It
Yeah.
definitely has return because you can see it at the end.
Yeah, and I suppose I think a lot of us take for granted that you walk into a sort of a centre or a super value, and the product is just going to be there on the shelf. Um, and then you hear things on the news such as the UK have all the empty shelves there, and particularly around fruit and veg and various other pieces. Yeah, like, are you seeing those issues real time as they're happening?
Absolutely, and it's funny whenever your day could vary from speaking to suppliers that are out in Spain at the moment. I'm not sure if people can get tomatoes or peppers, but that's where we're seeing an issue at the moment. But you're speaking with suppliers, and then you're also seeing firsthand in store as you or I go into a store and just kind of can't get the pepper, say, and that's, I suppose, what we're dealing with. Obviously, we're value and customer focused, but it's getting the product on the shelf as
Yeah,
quickly and safely and as, I suppose, as timely as possible.
yeah.
So
And I suppose some of what people may not realize, I suppose, in terms of the supply chain is, for all of those 600 stores or whatever else, you have to plan what deliveries are going to get. For all of the tens of thousands of products, somebody else or somebody in your team or other teams are planning, that's going to arrive on Tuesday to be sort of cross-docked or whatever it is, moved on Tuesday night to be in a store, Wednesday morning.
like when we think that we cover off Christmas in June, that's all planned. We have trade shows now, like Easter is, I know that, I suppose, be the next seasonal thing, and that's long gone in our eyes. That's at store months ago. So yeah, we're in Christmas planning meetings at the moment, which are, it's crazy to think for you and I, and I go into a store and just see the Christmas stuff there, but to think that it's coming from suppliers and months ago.
Yeah, that's amazing indeed. And
Yeah.
Stephen, from your point of view, obviously you're dealing with, I suppose, a very different product profile in terms of these are, premium brands. If you think of your Middletons and your Jamisons and your Redbreasts and all of those pieces, and you have a lead time on supply chain like it's your 10-year
Yeah.
whiskies, your 15, or whatever it is. But I'm assuming there's sort of a lot of complexities as well, because you're dealing with products that have excise duty and revenue and all of those things. Like how do those things make it more complex, or from what you've seen so far?
Yeah, I suppose I haven't been in the customs and excise team. I haven't been with them yet, but there's obviously a huge amount of work that goes into that there. Like, so you're shipping to all these different markets all over the world that all have different rules when it comes to labeling and everything like that. So there's an awful lot that goes in there. But yeah, I wouldn't be too sure yet. Haven't got involved in
That's
that
all
side
right.
of things yet. But
That's
I'll
okay.
get around to it soon. Yeah.
No, but I suppose even with what you are dealing with, I suppose in the domestic operations then as well, you're feeding, I suppose, obviously the Musgraves of this world and all the other
Mhm.
retailers, plus probably all the other smaller pubs, hospitality, everything as well as part
Yeah.
of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you probably
Exactly.
have a similar sort of number of customers as well that you're planning to ship to on a daily,
Yeah.
weekly basis.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it goes to we have a third-party warehouse that kind of a lot of the orders would go from there, but it's close enough to Fox and Geese. It's
Yeah,
called Masterlink, so that they would distribute a lot of our orders. But yeah.
fantastic. And I suppose when people think about, I suppose, the types of roles then that you have in supply chain, Um, actually, one of the things that strikes me from what all of you have sort of said is there's a lot of collaboration between functions. So, people think of supply chain as manufacturing and warehousing and procurement and various other pieces, but it sounds like there's also a lot of collaboration with, well, what are the marketing people looking to do, and the fact that you're talking about Christmas now in April, um, means that obviously you're planning, but you're not planning in a vacuum. So those sort of skills in terms of being able to communicate and collaborate, or is this like your sort of college group project but on steroids, or how does that compare to what you'd have seen before? I'm not sure if any of you want to come in on that particular one.
I would say, oh,
No,
Go on, Niall,
work
yeah,
away there now.
yeah,
No,
I would
no.
say that the two main skills I would say in supply chain are communication is probably the biggest one, and dealing with, like you said there, your R&D, your commercial team. If you don't have the forecast, sometimes it can nearly be too late if the order is already been placed and you don't have the stock there. So that is a huge thing, and being able to be good at cross-functional communication is very important, and
yeah,
that is what I'm talking about getting the understanding of the whole business and everything that's going on. So definitely, I would say communication is the biggest skill.
yeah. And you're involved in an ingredients business, so if
Mhm.
I'm understanding now, so you're sort of two levels before, even though your products
Yeah,
ultimately end up on the shelf.
of
So
course. Yeah,
talk to us about the
we're a
type of.
wee bit back the chain.
Yeah, so you're developing sort of new tastes, new ingredients, or what sort of things are you
Yeah,
involved with?
essentially, we'd be working with the companies like Irish distillers, and we'd be trying to make products containing our ingredients, but also other companies' ingredients. But trying to put as much of our ingredients in as possible to come up with a formula then that we can then produce on our sites for that ingredient. So we are a little bit further back, I suppose, from the end consumer. You won't see Kerry as a logo or a brand on the shop floor. Um, but that does make it a little bit more difficult at times. Maybe you're further away from your touch point and your feedback source of your
Yeah,
customer, and your forecasting is a little bit harder. But it is interesting just to see the different along the supply chain. There's different ways of getting involved.
got it. Fair enough. I just want to sort of say to people who are actually online as well, at any stage there's a sort of a chat box there as well if you want to ask any questions from the team that are here. And we're happy to take those questions and field them as we go on. But I suppose if you think of, I suppose, the route that you've all taken, all gone to college, all sort of, chosen your sort of specialist route from a college point of view, and then going into, I suppose, these structured programs. And from what you've all sort of talked about is sort of multiple rotations. I think over the number of years. What's the sort of continuity, or how do you end up with a sort of a separate boss each time, or is there somebody who's coordinating and looking at your performance and how you're developing and all of those? How does that work in the different companies? Molly, maybe you want to kick us
Yeah,
off on that. Is there like a coordinator for this, or how does that work?
yeah, absolutely. So within Musgrave, there's an early careers team headed by Siobhan Scanlon. So I suppose there is a full management team there for support throughout the graduate program. So I suppose that's the consistency in it, and probably what makes it a huge success is that you have that constant check-in or team with your early careers manager or the graduate program management. So throughout that whole 2-year process, you're having your line manager, your direct manager within your specific rotation. So, and
Hmm.
obviously they're trained and they know the objectives that you need as a supply chain graduate, in opposed to perhaps going into the role as like another employee in the company. So
Hmm.
they know what you kind of want. You're there in a learning environment. You're there to kind of see the supply chain, to take it in, kind of get on the job training, make a decision whether that's their supply chain you perhaps want to go into. But at all times, you do have that separate, I suppose, consistent manager within the graduate program, and there's an early careers department for that.
And do you get feedback then after each rotation, or how does that work in terms of how
Yeah.
you're doing and objectives and things like that?
Yeah, so you have obviously your core objectives to kind of get out of the rotation to make it as successful as possible, say for you as a graduate. So you get feedback, and you have your weekly or monthly check-ins with your line manager, and then separately you're constantly meeting your Siobhan, in our case, who's the early careers manager. You're meeting her, and she gets feedback from your manager as well. So it's all a learning environment, and I suppose that's the beauty of a graduate program. You're still kind of, the opportunities there for you to get as much out of it. Like, you have gone into a general supply chain graduate program, so there's so much areas, especially within Musgrave, to kind of get out of it, like whether you're in transport or you come up to central supply chain, which is more office based, so I suppose you're getting that feedback, and it's two ways, constructive feedback, and also, if you have any feedback or if you see an area that you particularly might like as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense indeed. And I see we have a question in as well from somebody as well. Is there any advice that any of you'd have in deciding, I suppose, which graduate program to apply for? How did you maybe, I suppose, come across the ones that you've done? I know, Stephen, you're carving your own route in terms of, I think your year is year number one for yourself. So
Year number one, yeah.
so it's great. But were there many programs available that you saw when you were in college, or is it the case of actually, I think, Niall, you said you were looking at a couple, and Kerry was the one that stood out for you? You're
Yeah,
just
I
not allowed to
definitely
crash
say
Musgraves or Irish Musgraves while we're doing this,
this
are
is a Kerry pitch now for everyone who's listening. Look, the advice would be to apply for them all if you can. I think it's great when you're in university to do well, and it is important as well. But I would definitely say, if you're in your final year, to start prioritizing applying for jobs, and go with the one. If supply chain is for you, have a look around. You already have, there's 3 supply chain programs from us speaking here. There's going to be others as well. I would apply and then see what one fits you best for what you want, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I suppose a lot of people as well, even though you kind of know what a supply chain is, it's very hard to know what a supply chain job is going to be. And there's so many different types of jobs within supply chain, whether it's sort of a planning or procurement or warehousing and distribution, or even sort of the connections to the R&D and to marketing. I suppose one of the benefits I think that you get from the graduate program is you get to try a little taster of each. It's like going to the restaurant and ordering the tasting menu, where you get a little bit of each, and you figure out, okay, where do we want to go from here? I suppose, were there any things that I suppose, that have surprised you in terms of, I suppose, what was different from the reality versus what you expected? I suppose you've all done a little bit of theory, or have had some exposure to the theory of supply chains. Um, is it a little more chaotic on the ground? Is there I think you mentioned risk and resilience and being prepared for the unexpected. I think, Molly, you sort of said as well. Do you need to be able to sort of cope with some of those pieces, or how would you describe that?
Yeah, I would say there's only a certain element that you can control, that any of us can control. So it's kind of like, I know I touched on it, like, we can't control the weather, we can manage how we communicate it and how we plan for it, and I suppose review what happened. Could we do it better next time? But there's only so much we can control, and I suppose I personally kind of get a thrill out of that. That it's changeable. Like, we have no idea what will come into tomorrow. I think we can all come out of the pandemic saying that.
Yeah.
Definitely wasn't quiet during that time, but
Yeah.
that's what definitely, that's what, when I went into supply chain, I definitely was surprised at how quickly things can change and how many things are outside your control. Like, even snow, a truck mightn't be able to drive. It's little things like that. The cost of fuel, we're all saying that's gone up, so that we incorporate that now into supply chain. Like, it's everyday things that impact the end-to-end supply chain, from supplier right through to retailer selling it then. So that's what I found definitely very interesting.
I think those are great insights, and actually those are very real things. When we think of supply chains, all the different factors that can influence it. I remember back to sort of the Beast from the East a number of years ago, when suddenly every loaf of bread in Ireland was gone, because people felt that the whole day where we couldn't buy bread. And then I think with the toilet roll thing somebody posted where suddenly toilet rolls weren't going to be available, and it's not as though demand was increasing for toilet rolls, but certainly consumers sort of bought them. So it's reacting to those and looking at each of those pieces. I think there's a great question coming in here actually in terms of, I suppose, thinking beyond. So obviously you're at different stages, but have you any thoughts even at this stage in terms of from what you've seen in your rotations? Probably unfair to you, Stephen, at this stage, given your sort of 2 rotations in, but what you've seen of areas that you say, oh, I really liked that, or I like that more than I expected to like it. Niall, anything so far from what you've seen?
Yeah, definitely think the supply planning would be an area I'd like to go into. I've kind of, like the rest of them there, I've kind of got to see every side of supply chain, and it's kind of one where I feel like maybe I could impact the most. And I suppose those conversations are already ongoing. And I'd say the same in most graduate programs. You have mentors and buddies, and you have directors who, as a graduate, you get a direct line to these people. So you'll never, if you're unsure, even in the position I'm in, you have people to speak to who can kind of direct you along, and if you go the wrong direction, you can always come back and go a different way.
Yeah, well, that's it indeed. Yeah, Stephen, anything so far from what you've seen? I think you've 2 rotations down. You've come from as a planning, and you've come from domestic operations. Are you holding out hope for
Yeah,
what's coming next?
No, the 2 rotations so far have been great, but they've also been quite different. Demand planning, you're kind of doing, there's a lot of forecasting, say, for the next year and that sort of stuff, whereas domestic operations is looking at stuff happening this week. So it's two completely different sides of the supply chain.
Yeah,
And they're both very good, but I think I enjoy the analytical side of things as well. So I'm kind of enjoying getting a lot of Excel work and SAP stuff done as well. And we do a lot of A3 projects. And so I'm involved in one of them at the moment. So I kind of, when I finish up, I wouldn't mind getting involved with a few more of them and leading a few of
very
them.
good.
So the
And
project
do
side
you
and
know
the
what the
analytical
future?
side, yeah.
Do you know what the future rotations that you have? Like, I think, did you say there was 6 rotations in total? What comes next for you?
Yeah. So I'm in supply planning next, which does all the kind of production planning on the bottling lines and all that sort of stuff. And then I'm in ICRM, which is they kind of look after all the different markets and stuff. And then I think I'm spending time in warehousing and packaging and freight as well as that. So yeah,
Fantastic.
there's
Yeah,
lots ahead. Like, yeah.
yeah. And of course, Molly, you went through all of those. So what was that process for you like at the end of the, when it came to the end? Was it you go, it's hardly you go through 2 years and suddenly surprised the pick that you're going to go today. I'm assuming this is an ongoing conversation as you're going through as to where
Yeah.
you're doing well and where you're enjoying.
Yeah, absolutely. And throughout your rotations and afterwards, you kind of gave an honest, I suppose, reflection on how or where you see your career going. So at the end, you're given the opportunity to apply for a role. Perhaps if you're happy in the rotation that you're in. So in my case, I stayed as a demand planner. So that I got huge opportunities out of that, holding a portfolio of ambient suppliers. And it's now, I suppose, helped me in the role I'm in today. I suppose I suppose enjoyment out throughout the graduate program, and I suppose within supply chain career as well. It's very people focused, so you're working with people the whole
Yeah,
time, whether it's operations or drivers or suppliers. It's not solely focused on, say, computer or analytical skills. It's very interpersonal, which I enjoyed. So I suppose I just kept that at the forefront of whatever I chose after the graduate program,
great.
choosing, I suppose, an area of supply chain.
Yeah, and maybe just if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit more about in terms of the current role that you have, because you have a team working for you now as well. And I think it's great to see. One of the things I've often said about people in supply chain is that if you go into supply chain and you show the right attitude and you can deal with things, you will be given opportunities. And
Yeah,
you keep doing that and you'll get the next opportunity to grow.
yeah, so I work with a great team of chill replenishment buyers here in the Republic of Ireland. So I suppose what I do or what my team do day to day is we're dealing with chill suppliers. So the demand that goes into any chill supplier in the Republic of Ireland. So there's hundreds of chill suppliers. So I suppose it's
So this is fruit
maintaining
and veg and yogurts and dairy and stuff like
fruit
that,
and
is it?
veg, yogurt, frozen, anything that'll go into a fridge or a freezer, really. And yeah, anything that goes into a fridge or freezer, we're covering from a team of 8. So very busy team. And managing, I suppose, supplier performance. So it's our expectation on inbound supply, how we get it out to the store. Massive thing is, I suppose, seasonal and being, I suppose, we all have competitors, so it's, I suppose, staying ahead of the game, keeping availability at the forefront of our operations. That's, I suppose, what I'm concentrating on now in central supply chain. Obviously, within the warehouse, and they might have different, I suppose, key priorities, but overall we're one supply chain. But to your point, working absolutely, it's working with people. It's like, especially in Musgrave, they've worked here a long time. It's a family run business ultimately, or it's an Irish owned business. So a lot of experience within the company, and I suppose it's the relationships that I've built throughout the graduate program got me, say, to the management position today. You know, other people, you know who to go to, rely on their expertise in supply chain, and ultimately have the same goal, servicing everything ourselves.
No, I think look, I think it's fantastic to see, and congratulations to you. And I'm sure all three of you are going to be hugely successful at what you do. But actually, I think you raise a great point in terms of the relationships you build through the graduate program, because in some respects, I suspect through these rotations, you're coming into an existing group, a small team or whatever else in each of those rotations, and you're this new special person that's been added. And I don't know how do they react to the graduates coming in. You know, is they, you know, I suppose, you know, is it, you know, you're just one of the team, you're sort of said, you know, hit the ground running, and or how does that work? Maybe Niall, I suppose you're in your third rotation at this stage.
Yeah, so I suppose when I move site, they've asked for you in terms of Kerry. You don't get given a graduate unless you ask for one. So they were all very welcoming, and it was a very easy progression from one site to another. And I suppose to them, you're an extra resource, so you're an extra brain in the office for when the chaotic things are happening, that you're there to maybe manage one of them. So I think generally most teams will be very welcoming to you, and they know if you're going there with the right attitude and you want to learn and you want to help them, then I think you're only going to have success from that.
No, I agree with you indeed. And Stephen, what's the experience so far from yourselves? I suppose actually that point of it being an extra resource for the team actually could be seen as a real benefit, I suppose, for, you know, to be able to get them to do additional projects or whatever else, or give them the bandwidth to do some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when I was in demand planning, there was a big budget file at the time, so I helped a lot with the material master stuff, which is creating new SKUs and materials and liquids on SAP, which kind of gave there's two people that work on that side of the team, so it gave them a really big dig out there. And it's kind of different in so there was a lot of kind of daily tasks there, but it's different, say, in domestic operations at the moment. I'm working on stuff that kind of takes up a week or two chunks, making reports and that sort of stuff. So it's two very different things, but definitely you're kind of giving them a dig out in different ways. But yeah.
Yeah, very good. And actually, see, there's a great question in as well. I suppose, you know, I never realized, never occurred to me. I suppose not only will we have graduates or potential graduates on the call here, but also, you know, people who are in companies who are looking to develop a graduate program. So I suppose, you know, no better people to ask than those who are already doing it. So, is there any advice that you'd give to companies who are doing this about things to do, things to get right? And actually, I like the last piece of the question as well, in terms of, you know, are there elements around the ability to travel or the further career? What are the things that stand out to you in terms of when you're looking at something like this? Maybe Molly, could I pick on you again on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my own personal preference whenever I chose to go down the route of a graduate program was out of, I suppose, curiosity of not entirely knowing what area of supply chain I wanted to go into. So I suppose
Fair point.
to answer that Adrian's question, it would be variety, to offer a choice to see all elements of it, you know, not to kind of go in. There's always a role within supply chain, and you can go in and apply for that role and stay in that role. But I suppose graduates are coming out of college or university to get an opportunity. It's nearly an extension on to college, if you want for want of a better word, variety to kind of. I still didn't know what I wanted to do. I'll put my hands up. So to kind of have that year or two to try things out, test it, see if it's for me, and then afterwards go into a role and I suppose be an expert in it, because I've seen all areas of the supply chain now. I suppose that's why I'm best fit for where I am today. So I'd say give them a taste of everything. Let them come to the meetings that you're going to, show them the strategic side, show them why you're making that decision. And I know the guys alluded there, like, you're an addition the role if we wanted to stay in that role, say.
Yeah.
So bring them on nearly like placement to an extent, keep it a learning environment, giving them kind of opportunity. So afterwards then we can apply and I suppose give back and perform, eventually give you a return.
That's amazing. I'm going to ask the same to Niall and to Stephen. Niall, what would your advice? Obviously, you've taken advantage of the international travel element of it anyway. So that's
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think Molly's answered that question brilliantly well. Have to say, just the whole kind of give them as like myself getting involved in supply chain was to see as much of the company as I could possibly see.
Yeah.
And I suppose they're applying for the graduate program, maybe do the same, show them as much. And cross-functional work, I think, would be another thing to add to that. I think it's really useful, whether you be in demand planning and working with commercial or material call off and working with your procurement team. So definitely think that's very, very useful when you're a graduate. And I think regular feedback is another really good thing, whether it can be weekly or bi-weekly or whenever you can get it into your schedule. I think that's very useful at the stage that we're at, to know that we're going in the right direction, and for a bit of confidence boost at times when maybe the chaotic stuff gets on top of you.
Yeah, and there will be chaotic days in any career and any piece as well. There'll be days when you say, okay, how did I get myself into this? And again, Stephen, I suppose again, you I think you've got two people in the current year within
Yeah,
within Irish Distillers or whatever else. So I'm assuming you're on staggered rotations then. So while you're doing something, they're on something else,
yeah,
and
pretty much.
and,
Yeah,
and,
when I
and,
was in
and
demand planning, she was in supply planning. But I think what really appealed to me was all the different rotations that we got to do. Even though some of them are quite short, some they're only 3 or 4 months, you still do get a good feel of kind of what teams you enjoy, what teams you're not going to enjoy, and that sort of thing. And when
yeah,
it comes to say, the other stuff for graduate programs like the bonuses and travel and stuff like that, I was kind of more looking at the companies more than the little things like that. I'd look them up on Glassdoor and stuff like that and see what the reviews are like and all that kind of stuff. So if it kind of seemed like a nice company to work for, I would have applied for it. Like,
yeah,
that would have been something that really would have appealed to me more so than, a big salary and that sort of stuff. Like, obviously it helps, but
yeah.
yeah, no, definitely the company more than anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I think that company culture, I think, is a really important piece. On when people are looking at things, and I suppose one of the I suppose one of the areas on that we hear more and more is things like sustainability and the company's record in terms of doing the right thing and being on the right side of some of the social agenda as well. And I suppose supply chain is one of those areas where I think we actually have a potential to influence. Um, what's the packaging, how many trucks we have on the road, and all of those different pieces. So I think there's some great opportunities, for everybody, um, through all of that. But I think one of the, I suppose, if you were uh, to think of, I suppose, one of the things that amuses me sometimes is we would obviously recruit as well, and we get people, a lot of people with sort of supply chain masters and various other pieces, most of them fantastic. But I love the CVs that sort of come in and say, well, I've done this and I'm an expert on this and I'm no expert on that or whatever else. But to your point, in a lot of cases, I think what the academic role does is it gives you a really good framework, um, for what to expect. But then framework hits reality, and you really get a sense for how those frameworks work, whether that's in planning or warehousing or other pieces. So I think it's bridging the wonderful theory that you get from an academic point of view with the actual practical of how does this work when it meets customers and suppliers and colleagues and all of those pieces. And I think probably some of those skills, the collaboration skills, are probably the ones that are probably really going to get developed most during these rotations. We've a question in there as well, and possibly less for maybe less for yourselves, but I suppose for career changers, so people who started. And I'll admit I'm a reformed accountant who went into supply chain not today or yesterday, but we do get a lot of people who decide later, I suppose, in their career. Maybe they've started out on one career and are now looking to do something different. And I suppose probably unfair on yourselves on this, but I suppose it's probably fair to say that you've got people from all sorts of backgrounds within supply chain. I suppose if you look to the colleagues that you're working with, um, you've got people who've come from uh, different careers, different backgrounds. I think one of the things that I've sort of seen very much within supply chain is people coming in one part of the supply chain and then migrating on to the others. So not unlike what you said, Molly, there about starting in demand planning and then moving across to the various other pieces. It's one of those careers where you can come in through fleet operations or warehouse or various other pieces, um, and then just say, okay, now I'm going to go to procurement, and then there's an opportunity somewhere else. So it's about eyes open while you're in there, and while you're looking at each of those. How about sort of career aspirations? Obviously, you're there, Molly. You've built a good career already. I'm sure there's a long way still to go on that. Are there things that you look at and you sort of say, well, actually, I enjoy doing these pieces right now, but how do you think, I suppose, a number of years further forward, um, are there further qualifications, or there's other things that you feel that as you start to see this, I'd like to do more in and learn more in some of these other areas?
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, well, obviously, I'm extremely happy in the role. So I've just moved into the management
yeah,
role in the last year. So I think I'm good for the time being. Still learning, everyday learning. Absolutely,
yeah,
that's for sure. But there's so much, as you touched on there yourself, Lorcan. There's so much within supply chain. Like I did a course from UCC in Greenbelt, so lean management. So I studied, say, general business. I specialized in management, as I mentioned earlier, but had never, I suppose, delved into the actual. I know the two guys have studied a fit like supply chain management. So I just did a module in college in supply chain management. So studying and getting that opportunity throughout the graduate program to do, or throughout the supply chain, actually, was an opportunity from my supply chain department to study formally in lean management, and then applying that to conversations. And I know you touched on sustainability as well, Lorcan. So it's that kind of formal education that's there within supply chain as well that can, I suppose, accelerate your career in a certain
yeah,
area as well. So like if you're in, lean management, could go back to my warehousing
hmm
operations experience, or else in the conversations I'm having end-to-end efficiency. So at the end of the day, all supply chains are looking to take cost out of them, like reduce handling,
yeah,
one-touch replenishment. That's, I suppose, our ultimate aim at the end of the day, is to do things quicker and cheaper for
yeah,
customers. So there is definitely obviously formal training, but mine, I suppose, my own personal experience is the green belt, which I found very, very interesting.
yeah. And then obviously there's more belts that come after that one as well, Molly. I'm
Right.
sure you know
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, there is. I think I'll leave that off the 5-year plan.
Yeah, and Niall, obviously you're coming in from a food science background, which is a phenomenal
Yeah.
background actually to have in terms of understanding the products and various other
Mhm.
pieces. Um, are there further courses? And I know you're still going through the graduate program, but are there
Mhm.
further things you sort of say, actually, I'd like to learn more about this, and are the opportunities there to try to continue that?
Yeah, I will. As part of our graduate program, we actually do a course in the first year, which is sort of around emotional intelligence. And I think if I was to do a course, I've kind of done the degree and masters, it probably would be around communication or leadership or something like that. And I think they would stand to me probably big time in the next few moves up. But you don't really have to have all the answers now, I would say. When you're in the graduate program, you just soak it all up. You do your rotations, you get it all under your belt. And there are the early careers team, like Molly said, you have them in most companies, and you'll have your people in your department, supply chain, who are high up, and they'll talk to you about the opportunities. And
Yeah,
to be honest, the one that was talked to me the other week, I didn't even know existed. So there's always opportunities opening up in supply chain. So
yeah.
it really is just a great career choice.
Yeah, no, indeed. And Stephen, and I suppose you just finished one set of studies. Don't ask me about more study at this stage, but anything that is there that you sort of say, well, actually, there's further things we'd like to do or like to in terms of training or courses.
Yeah, no, definitely the green belt. Me and the other grad, Sinead, were chatting about it recently enough. Because we had a regroup session with all the other graduates in our distilleries last week, and
Yeah,
two of the engineers had done their green belts. We mentioned that we'd be interested in doing as well. So I think that'll be really beneficial for us to kind of bring those kind of skills into the different rotations that we're doing. So I think
yeah,
we've to get on to them again, but hopefully that'll be organised soon enough, and that'll
yeah.
be really great. Yeah.
That's fair enough. And look, I see a question there, and it's a valid question as well from somebody who's, I suppose, who's trying to, I suppose, get into supply chain from a career changing perspective. And I thought maybe I'll try and attack, maybe sort of tackle it maybe from this perspective of, I think one of the things I get asked quite often from people when we would sort of do talks at schools and colleges and elsewhere is, I suppose people have this, a perception of, and actually I was at one, I suppose, but 3 or 4 weeks ago, we talked to a class, and they sort of said, look, I'm applying for roles, but I have this qualification, but all I'm getting a chance for are some of the more junior roles, and in as a warehouse associate or in as something else, and I suppose sometimes people have an expectation that that with the qualification they should be able to get in, somewhere else or whatever else. So I would say, by and large, my own experience of these things is that, you know, think of the companies that you would like to work with. I suppose every retailer has a supply chain. Every product company has a supply chain. Think of where you want to go, um, and it doesn't matter where you get in, and sometimes it will take time, and sometimes it will take sort of multiple efforts to get into somewhere. But if you can get into an organization and actually show that you're going in, not that you're working sort of superhuman hours or anything like that, but if you're going in with your eyes open, willing to contribute and willing to take some of the learning that you've got from elsewhere, I would say go in at any level you can, but go into the right organization. Go into one that actually has a reputation. Use your glass doors, use your other pieces to go into the companies that have the right reputation, who will recognize that. And because, again, I suppose back to the point we touched on earlier, supply chain is one of these things where you have people in the organizations, and I run a consulting company whereby we're often called in to take a look at, well, how can we make things more efficient. First people you talk to are the people who are at the front line, the people in the warehouse, the people on the factory floor, or whatever else, because they will quickly tell you what's frustrating to them. And it's the ability to work with those people and actually identify those people who are in there with eyes open, brain on, to be able and they have some phenomenal solutions to be able to bring to bear. So I wish that person well. I do think they do make reference there actually to something which I think is new, which is the apprenticeship options. And there was a webinar earlier in the week on the various apprenticeship options that are there, for people, and actually for a lot of people, particularly who are coming later in their career. And the apprenticeships actually are a great option because you can get benefit from what's called recognized prior learning. So it doesn't mean that you have a degree or other pieces in the past, but they will take into account your experience in the past in deciding at what level you can go on to those apprenticeships, and they create a lot of opportunities. But I suppose we're coming closer to the end here, and I would um, I suppose think through, I suppose, some of the people who are on the call here who maybe haven't chosen supply chain as yet and are sort of considering supply chain versus other career options. Is there any advice that you'd have for them, or anything that you'd say from your own learnings that to help them think through whether or not supply chain will be right for them? Is it particular traits that they might have, or particular things that they enjoy, or just is it a case of to learn more about it and find out more about it? Any thoughts? Maybe start again with you, Niall, this time.
Well, I'd say the two skills. I think if you're good at planning, and good at communicating, that'll go very far in supply chain. But I also think if you're not good at it, it's a great opportunity to get good at those two skills. That are going to be very useful in most departments. But there's a lot out there on supply chain. If when COVID hit, if your mind got thinking about why is there no bread on the shelves, then you're probably interested in supply chain subtly. So maybe it's just worth looking into it a bit more and thinking about it. It's very broad. There's so much to get involved in, and it's very cross-functional. So it's not direct defining your career path.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Stephen, how about yourself? Any advice for those?
Yeah, no, completely agree with Niall, especially on the communication side of things. It's a huge part, and yeah, I suppose if you like a fast-paced environment, it's probably great for you as well. It's kind of stuff changing the whole time. Even say when I was in demand planning, even though stuff was, you're dealing with stuff forecasting for a year, a lot of the stuff is still quite fast-paced with stuff needing to be changed and all the stuff coming in from different markets. So yeah, no, definitely if you enjoy kind of fast-paced environment, but yeah.
And Molly?
Yeah, again, just to build on the two guys there, like it's tangible, so you can see what you're doing. It's reactive, constantly reacting to day-to-day things. It's relevant. It's on the news. Your work doesn't go unnoticed, that's for sure. again, it's the fast pace it's that buzz that I get from it, for sure. Yeah.
What were your friends' reactions to? Because again, people are sort of used to people going down the accountancy route or going down the sort of the medical route or whatever it is. What were the reaction of your friends to supply chain careers? And as I let you think about the answer to that, I'll give you there's a lady called Dr. Yvonne Delaney who leads a lot of the supply chain functions within the University of Limerick, was speaking yesterday or whatever else, and she was an accountant, and when she first took on a role in a warehouse managing role within a large multinational, her mother was shocked that she was going to work in the stockroom. So I think perceptions of supply chain have probably moved on a little bit, but do your friends understand what they do? Do you get the question of, well, what is it that you do and what is a supply chain? Or I suppose less so for you, Stephen. You came from a group of folks who actually went down the masters in supply chain route.
Yeah.
But maybe Niall and Molly, do they understand it? Do they know it?
Yeah, well, similar to that lady that you mentioned, when I told my family I was moving to Cork to go into a chilled warehouse, I'm not really sure they knew what was going on either. But again, it typically, in everyone, a warehousing logistics does tend to be a male orientated environment.
Yeah.
But God, I couldn't, I think my time spent in the warehouse was invaluable to where I am today. At least I know what was happening there. I can explain it now. So in terms of supply chain, there is, I suppose, a mystery around it but it's because it's so vast. They're so vast.
Yeah.
But as Niall mentioned there, if you're querying why something's not on a shelf, the likelihood is that you're interested in supply chain, or you have kind of that mindset, that questioning mindset. And I suppose supply chain offers that, gives you answers. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But yeah, no, they understand what I'm doing now.
They do. And actually, you raised a great point in terms of, look, it has traditionally been seen as sort of male dominated, but I think if you look at the numbers coming through in supply chain courses and various other pieces, it's actually there's a great mix in terms of great
Yeah,
balance associated with
sure.
that.
Yeah.
And is that improving, I suppose, in terms from a diversity perspective? Is that something you see efforts to improve, or is there, I'm sure there's more we can do?
Yeah, well, from a warehousing point of view, when I first went in, there was I was just myself, and now there's loads of girls and women working in the warehouse. So absolutely, it's definitely moving forward. I like 100%. And then in terms of central supply chain in demand planning, I'd say it's more women than men actually. So
Very good.
yeah. So definitely within Musgrave, absolutely, yeah, very, very diverse in terms of supply chain.
What do the friends thinking, or do they understand it?
Well, I suppose when they asked me what supply chain was, I asked them how long did they have, because it's sort of a very hard question to define, like what supply chain is, because it is
Yeah.
so vast. But I suppose after about an hour and a half of talking to them, they kind of understood it at the end.
Fantastic. You haven't converted a few of them with you, have you now?
No, not quite yet, but maybe in the future.
Very, very good. So Stephen, you went down the sort of the masters in supply chain route.
Yeah, the masters in supply chain, yeah.
You were surrounded by fellow nerds as well, and from a supply chain perspective.
Yeah, you could say that. I remember one time we were, it was in the first trimester, and we were about 10 weeks into procurement. And I sat down next to one of the lads, and he'd just opened his laptop and he had Googled what is procurement. So we wouldn't be too big experts on it yet. But yeah, no, definitely, it kind of depends who you're talking to. I remember mentioning to a family friend that I was planning to do the masters in supply chain, and
Yeah.
he works for Honeywell in supply chain there, and he was saying just be prepared that anything that goes wrong, it'll be your fault.
Yeah.
You know.
And actually, you know what? I think for so many years that has been supply. We only hear about supply chains when somebody sticks a ship in the Suez Canal and suddenly stuff can't get there or whatever else. And I think in a lot of respects, the most successful supply chain people were the people that you never heard about because the supply chains were running so well. And there was this element of supply chain being it's sort of it's the heart of the operations, but as long as the heart keeps pumping, nobody knows that the heart is there. But actually, I do think that perception is changing, and I do think when we come to things like sustainability and needing to drive changes that are there, like um, we've got sectoral targets now in terms of what we need to do around climate change. We've got real change that needs to happen, and I think everybody realizes that. And actually, the supply chain people are the people who are at the table designing the next version of that supply chain, which will dictate how many trucks are going to be on the road, which will dictate how much plastic is on the product, or what happens to the product at end of life, and all of those things. So I do think for the people who are interested, not just in the the operational elements, but I actually think as we look forward to the future of supply chain, I think there's going to be a lot more opportunity around, how do we improve healthcare? I can tell you right now, the supply chain into healthcare and out of healthcare is broken. So we need the best people in the world looking at healthcare supply chain. If you look at food waste, and the challenges associated with that, and I know Musgraves and others are really working on some of those. There are huge challenges there that we need the best supply chain and people in the world taking a look at that. You look at all of those different things, there's a real opportunity to be at the table. Now, there's a day-to-day job to get done, but also, within those day-to-day jobs, there will be the opportunities to go on to those projects to look at packaging, the projects to look at the transportation network, the projects to look at other pieces. So I think those are all, great things to have as opportunities that are available for us. One final question, because we're almost at the end of our time here. I suppose in many respects, supply chain is one of these things where anybody can call themselves a supply chain professional. So it's not a regulated industry. It's almost like, I suppose some of you have seen the documentary around some other industries that are like that. But one of the things I think there is some talk about is sort of continuing professional development within supply chain careers. So you're all young enough that your education is fresh or whatever it is, but would you like, I suppose, to see an environment where there's a requirement that every 2 years or every year or whatever else you're doing some additional education and adding to those skills? And could you see that being something that would add to the sort of the supply chain, I suppose, profile in many respects, that you're continually required to retrain to add skills as part of that? I'm not sure if any of you want to come in on that one.
Definitely think for a successful supply chain, you need to be relevant. Like it's especially as relevant as your customer wants you to be. And if you're not, I suppose, serving what your customer wants, you're going to quickly sink. So definitely in terms of whether that was through formal education, definitely reskilling, keeping up to date with what's going on in the current or whatever climate you want to be successful in. Absolutely. I think you'll know fairly quickly whether you're not relevant or not, and your sales start to fall. Yeah.
Stephen, or not?
As rules and laws change, Brexit, that changed everything in terms of customs of all of our products leaving the UK or going to the UK, raw material side, customer side. So definitely think it'd be great to get sort of more learning and real courses on these sorts of things. It'll definitely make life easier on the day-to-day basis for employees.
Fantastic. And Stephen?
Yeah, for sure. Just looking at the comment there from Damien, that it's
see it,
learning every day is definitely very true. That there's always kind of continuous improvement there that could be done on a regular basis. Yeah, but no, I agree.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I'm still learning anyway. So, but that is great. Well, listen, I would love to. Thank the three of you for being absolutely wonderful on this and sharing your experience. Thank those who joined us online and those who will probably also watch it on the replays or whatever else for the time. And actually also thank sort of the folks from Irish Distillers and Musgraves and Kerry as well for releasing you as well to sort of talk with us. It has been absolutely pleasure talking with you, and I'm sure we'll see great things from you later in your supply chain careers as you continue to sort of develop as well. All right, thank you all, and thanks everybody online for listening in. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.